everyone. Thanks for attending this talk, and thanks to Practites for inviting me in this circle of talks called QA Takes the Lead. But before we start with this talk, let me present myself. My name is Ariadna Trueba. I'm the Quality Technical Director at Parser, and I have more than 15 years of experience in software testing, audits, and quality leadership. And I've spent my career helping organizations transform how they approach quality, but not just in testing, but also across data, systems, and decision making. And today, I want to talk about something that's both essential and often misunderstood: test automation. But not just automating per se, but automating what actually matters. And we are going to explore how QAs can lead with strategy, risk awareness, and governance. We need to shift from automation as a task to automation as a production quality facilitator. And more importantly, it's about how QA moves from testers to strategic quality leaders. So let's get started. Let's begin by looking at the current QA and automation landscape. Many teams have embraced this automation. Tools are widely adopted, pipelines are set up, and dashboards are full of green and red indicators. So test suites are growing, but so are flakiness, maintenance overhead, and gaps in critical risk coverage. And we are still seeing late-stage bugs, production regressions, and firefighting sprints. So in reality, automation is often treated like a race for speed, coverage, and quantity. And despite all this automation, confidence hasn't necessarily followed. So it's become clear that chasing metrics like numbers of tests or percentage of code coverage doesn't equal quality. We've created a culture of misaligned metrics where we focus on how much we test, not how well we test. And often, this automation lives in isolated silos. One team automates UI, another does API checks, another owns the data validations, but there's no unified strategy. And this results in duplicated efforts, blind spots, and a false sense of security. And ultimately, what we have is automation happening without a quality strategy behind it. Automation without a purpose. Test without clear ownership. Coverage without confidence. That's the gap we need to close. So the real question is not, do we have automation? The real question is our automation protecting what matters most to business, to our users, to our own teams? So that's the shift we need to make. Automation is not the goal. Quality confidence is. There's been a push to automate more. So more scenarios, more layers, more tests. And this is a common trap many teams fall into: the belief that more automation equals better quality. And this mindset leads to what I call automation for the sake of automation. But more isn't always better. In fact, it can be harmful. So we automate everything we can without asking whether it adds value, reduces risk, or improves confidence. So the result? Quantity increases, but quantity is not quality. And teams spend more time fixing broken tests than preventing defects. Test cases count goes up, yeah, but the impact on our user experience or production stability is negligible. So in fact, more tests are often means more noise. And even worse, we still miss critical failures because no one prioritizes it based on risk. When automation is treated as a checkbox or vanity metric, it becomes a liability instead of an asset. And we see pipelines flooded with flaky tests, false positive, environment failures, or race conditions. So teams start ignoring these failures and trusting in automation execution. Instead of being a safety net, the test suite becomes a liability. Then there's the issue of maintenance overload. With hundreds or thousands of test cases, even minor changes to the system can break dozens of scripts. QA team needs to spend more time fixing tests than preventing defects. Even worse, despite all this effort, blind spots remain. So we still miss critical flows, risk integration, or real-world edge cases because automation wasn't guided by strategy. And this all comes from a lack of strategic alignment. Automation is often disconnected from business priorities. So, for example, we can automate logging 10 different ways, but forget to validate pricing logic or data integrity. So it's not so uncommon to see entire test suites that don't test what actually matters. So we've confused automation activity with quality outcomes. And until we reframe automation as a quality facilitator, we'll keep spinning in cycles. So automation isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters. And what does meaningful automation look like? So how do we move from automation overload to automation that actually matters? Well, first, we need to focus on business risk and customer impact. Not all tests are created equal. A typo on the footer and a broken checkout flow are not the same. So that's why we need to prioritize automation based on what's truly at stake. What could damage trust, revenue, or compliance? And we apply prioritization frameworks like risk-based testing, where we assess both likelihood and impact of failure. This is where prioritization frameworks comes into play. So one effective approach to risk-based testing could be: how likely is it to break, and what happens if it does? So features that are both like high risk and high impact should be first targets for automation. For example, payment processing, user authentication, or key API integrations. Those should never go untested. And from there, we identify and protect high-value test assets like fast smoke tests, regression tests for business-critical rules on calculations, API contract tests, data quality checks over poor data. High-value tests are not just code. They are business safeguards. And they protect what customers care about, what leadership worries about, and what operations depend on. So this is what makes automation meaningful. Not automating everything, but automating the right things for the right reasons. That's how test automation becomes a quality investment, not a maintenance cargo. So let's shift gears and talk about metrics, because what we measure influences what we prioritize. So too often, test automation is measured with vanity metrics: number of test cases, code coverage percentages, or how many tests pass today. These don't tell us if we are safe to release or if our automation is making an impact. We need metrics that reflect quality outcomes. So for example, how many defects escape to production? How quickly can we identify and resolve test failures? And what percentage of tests are flaky or ignored? So metrics should guide decisions, not just reporting. So for example, the DORA metrics, like deployment frequency, lead time for changes, mean time to recovery, and change failure rate. So these are useful for delivery velocity, but they don't explain how good our tests are or how effective our automation is at catching issues. They measure impact, but not activity. But in quality, we also need to look at different indicators like test effectiveness, defect containment, or coverage versus risk. And another critical area is signal-to-noise ratio in our test results. So for example, if 40% of our test failures are false positive or flaky, our team stops trusting the results. So that noise kills confidence and slows everything down. We should track how many failures are real versus ignored, skipped, or retried. So in short, metrics should drive decisions, not as a checkboxes. Metrics should reflect quality outcomes, not just testing activity. And they should help us answering the question, do we have confidence to ship this software to real customers right now? That's what meaningful metrics look like. So, who owns the direction of automation? With everything we just covered, noise, the silos, the misalignment, one thing becomes clear. QA must take the lead in redefining how we approach automation, not just in writing tests, but in guiding the strategy behind them. We understand the system end to end. We speak the language of risk and we work across delivery teams, right? QA isn't just a test execution function anymore. It's a strategic discipline, uniquely positioned to balance speed with risk, a unique position to influence what gets automated, how it's maintained, and why it matters. So velocity without quality leads to rework, unreliability, and customer attrition. So as quality owners, QA professionals are the natural bridge between technical implementation and business expectations. We understand the tech stack, but we also speak the language of users, stakeholders, and regulators. So that makes QA uniquely equipped to guide smarter automation decisions. Not just what can be tested, but what should be tested. And QA is also the guardian of long-term confidence. QA ensures that automation supports ongoing reliability, regulatory compliance, and customer trust as the product evolves. We are not just testing now, we are building a safety net for the future. And perhaps most importantly, QA brings a whole system view. We are the only ones consistently looking across APIs, data layers, UI, customer flows, understanding how changes ripple through the stack. So this perspective is critical in an area where there's microservices, distributed data, complex integrations. On one small break can cause a major incident. So if we want automation that matters, if we want sustainable, trusted, scalable software, QA has to lead the conversation, not just in writing tests, but in shaping the strategy. This leadership is crucial to moving from reactive testing to proactive quality engineering. We are not just test executors anymore. We are the stewards of trust in the product. So let's break down what QA leadership looks like in a practice. So because it's no longer just about writing tests or owning regression suites, as I said. So QA today must operate as a strategic partner, owning quality across the entire product lifecycle. QA doesn't execute tests anymore. We own the product quality signals. That includes test results, production defects, customer feedback, performance trends, so anything that reflects how reliable, usable, and safe the product is. We connect the dots and surface insights that inform smarter decisions. So QA guides teams on what to test and, more importantly, what to prioritize based on both business risk and technical complexity. QA also helps defining what good looks like. So from acceptance criteria to release readiness, ensuring that automation is focused on risk, not just code path. And instead of automating everything, QA helps teams focus on high value automation, prioritized by customer impact. As I said, not just code coverage. And that is what separates efficient automation from noisy automation. So again, it's not about quantity. It's about protecting what matters. Quality is everyone's concern. We provide shared visibility so that everyone is acting on the same understanding of risk and readiness. And we maintain a whole system view. When QA leads, quality becomes intentional, not accidental. QA's strategy role is about visibility, guidance, alignment, and impact. As I say repeatedly, we are no longer just testers. We are quality leaders, and it's time we lead accordingly. But leadership requires structure, and that's where automation governance comes in. Without governance, automation becomes chaos, redundant, unstable, impossible to scale. So a strong governance framework helps ensure automation is consistent, valuable, and sustainable. And it includes 5 key pillars. The first is ownership and accountability. And it asks the question, so who owns automation strategy? Who maintains the test? Who ensures tests stay aligned with product evolution? Without ownership, automation degrades fast. The second one is standards and guidelines. So folder structure, naming convention, levels of abstraction, coding best practices. So this improves collaboration and avoids conflicts on documental decisions. The third pillar is code review and CI/CD integrations. So test code is product code, so it must be peer-reviewed, version control, and integrated into pipelines. So this enforces quality gates and prevents breaks or unapproved tests from contaminating the CI. The fourth one is the test data management. So avoid broken tests by managing data environments smartly, use clean and reusable test data, feed strategies for synthetic and production-like data, isolate and repeat if needed. So without good data, even the best tests fail or become flaky. And the fifth pillar is monitoring and audit. So measure test effectiveness, not just execution. We must track automation health over time, answering the questions, are our tests stable? Are they covering the high risk? Are they catching real bugs or just generating noise? So regular audits help grab obsolete tests, improve test quality, and prove value to the business. So with governance, we move from isolated scripts to a quality system. But let me pause here and say something that I think most of us in QA have seen firsthand. Good automation without proper governance quickly turns into expensive chaos. So you must start with good intentions, fast pipelines, shiny tools, ambitious coverage goals. But if no one's accountable, if naming is inconsistent, if flaky tests aren't reviewed, or if test data isn't reliable, the whole system starts to break down. So what was supposed to bring confidence now breeds confusion. What was meant to reduce risk becomes a maintenance burden. So, and you spend more time debugging the test than the application. That's why we need automation governance. And governance isn't about red tape. It's about ensuring our automation continues to deliver value, not noise. Because automation should scale quality, not hide problems under a surface of green check marks. So just like developers use design patterns, QA uses governance to ensure tests scale with confidence. And it's time we move beyond being seen as simple automators, so people who build scripts and run tests, and embrace our role as strategic quality leaders. Imagine automation as a living system. It has inputs, feedback loops, so our framework needs to ensure that tests are created for the right reasons, reviewed by the right peers, maintained with the right data, integrated in the right pipelines, and monitored with the right signals. This isn't a heavy process. It's intentional practice. And that means that we are not just building automation. We are helping the organization define what should be automated and why. We apply a risk-based lens and prioritize based on impact, not just coverage or inconvenience. So also our work needs to align with something bigger. And this is why we need to connect automation efforts to organizational OKRs and product risk. If reliability is the goal, we assess how automation protects against regression in critical flows. And another point is that QA must lead in defining what done really means, not just all tests passed, but have we mitigated risk enough to release? We bring the data from test results, production signals, performance metrics, and usability feedback to support adjustment. It's not a gut call. It's a quality-informed decision. So by the end, QA leadership means being part of the release readiness conversation. We help teams interpret quality signals, not just for today's release, but for the long-term health of the product. And that's how we shift from testing to strategic leadership, from just checking boxes to shaping decisions. So now let's wrap up into some key takeaways. So these aren't just ideas. These are practical shifts that quality leaders and teams can make starting today. So it's time to move away from automation for the sake of automation and towards automation that supports strategic quality. And QA must evolve from being testers to being strategic quality leaders. And that means advocating for smart automation, not just fast automation. Stop treating automation coverage percentages as a success metric. Coverage doesn't equal protection. It just measures activity, not value. Stop focusing on the number of tests or runs. Start asking, which tests catch what matter most? And stop letting teams work in isolation. This creates automation islands that are hard to scale or trust. Instead, start leading by example in meetings. Use business risk, product complexity, and customer impact to guide what gets automated. Quality starts with strategic prioritization. Start aligning automation outcomes with your OKRs. Show QA supports the bigger picture. Create shared standards, ownership. Make automation consistent, sustainable, and scalable, and encourage QA to be part of the release readiness, not just test reporting. And finally, ensure quality is not a phase, it's a mindset. So let's stop automating for coverage and start leading for confidence. So thank you so much for attending this talk. If you have any question, I will try to answer it. And you have here my LinkedIn. If you want to connect, I will be happy to connect with you and answer offline any question that you may have. Thank you so much.
Ariadna, are you with us? I think there's plenty. We actually got plenty of questions for your talk. So let me go back to the question part and share that in the meantime. Okay, so the first question that we had is about Michelle asking, I'm experiencing how clients and PMs pressure QAs to produce more automated scripts for coverage sake, as they believe this would speed up regression testing. But I agree how blown up automation suites can easily become a liability. And then how do you communicate that automated high value test is better? How would the client and the PMs agree to be convinced of this? If you can share from your experience, I think this is a pain that is heavily shared with the audience.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So again, thank you so much for attending. So sorry, I cannot just turn my camera on. I'm on the, in the middle of something. So yeah, I already answered the question. So it's trying to convince the clients or the PMs and focus on the business impact. So faster releases, fewer critical bugs. So you need to explain how large and focused a test suite increases the maintenance. So a slow feedback. So you need to present to them like a risk-based approach, which is like more important for this kind of people like PMs or client or whatever it is. They are not interested on engineering side. They are most interested on what matters the most for them, what it's like the requirements for them, how business can be impacted or not with that. So this is like the kind of response that they are expecting from you. So depending on which is like a person that you need to present your results or your strategy, you need to change the focus. You need to convince them somehow by speaking their language. That's the most valuable advice that I can give you on that matter.
Thank you. And a little bit of a different question. I don't know if you can answer, but we can try. From your experience, what would you say is more important, to write more API or integration test, or to focus on a more simple UI test?
This is an answer that could be, this is a question that could be answered by taking a look on the test pyramid. The test pyramid, the basis of that is like unit testing, then integration testing. Those are like the basis tests that any developer team should integrate in their code, and then focusing on simple UI tests. But this is like the last piece of the pyramid, the top of that, like the point. So less UI tests and more robust UI and integration tests. But as I always say, this always depends on the product and the business. So sometimes the project are going to say to you that no, developers cannot just focus on integration tests. You need to focus on UI tests. So we are not going to spend all of our work on UI tests. We need to then try to balance on an end-to-end test, which is covering also the backend test from our side, from QA side, plus the UI test, and not being focused the 100% of our time on the UI test, because this is useless if the backend is not properly being tested somehow. Yeah, basically that.
I 100% agree. And I think, let's see, hold on. Yeah, so first of all, there is a thank you from the audience. I think I want to thank you as well. First of all, I know you're, as Ariadna said, she's in the middle of a business trip, so couldn't do the session live, but it was important for her to participate. And I think this is very much speaking about the shift we need to take in perception about there are the tests that needs to be done, which can be automation or can be writing test cases or executing tests, but it's also about always asking, why are we doing what we're doing? And making sure that we are doing stuff that's providing business value. And I think we need to understand that we're not testing for the sake of testing. Okay, this is just not cutting it anymore. And taking the lead is about testing for the sake of supporting the business and then looking on in a way, but the means to do that is looking on metrics that actually matters and provide value. And by starting with this shift, I think this talk was very important and very eye-opening for people who are not necessarily thinking this way yet. But I definitely think this is the direction that the industry is that we should go into by changing perception, by getting the respect that we deserve as fellow testers. And I want to thank you for giving this talk. Yeah. And I will address one last thing about comment before handing over is the fact that sharing, you can read it, but for people who are not reading, is the fact that there's no one answer for test strategy. There's guidelines to be aware of, but strategy is driven by the context of which testing is happening. And I agree, there is no one size fits all, but there is a muscle that we can build in understanding the right match for every company and sometimes even every different project that we work for, which changes from one time to the other.